Welcome to Sleepcast, probably the most boring podcast in the world. Sleepcast is created to help you relax, slow down, and gently drift off to sleep. There's nothing you need to remember and nowhere else you need to be. Simply get comfortable, close your eyes, and allow tonight's quiet story to carry you away. And now, we hand things over to our two hosts for today's episode. Rest well and enjoy.
It basically single-handedly saved a collapsing global music industry. I mean, we're talking about generating billions of dollars during a time of severe economic depression.
Right. And then 27 years later, the desperate financial pressure to repeat that exact same miracle ends up killing him in his own bedroom.
It's just wild to think about.
It really is. It's the ultimate paradox of modern fame. We build these massive global architectures to sustain our cultural icons, and we just assume those structures provide absolute safety.
But they don't, do they?
Not at all, because when your art becomes a global currency, you stop being a human being, you become an economy.
Yeah.
And, economies require management, defense, aggressive insulation, and that creates a uniquely dangerous, isolated bubble for the person actually at the center of it all.
Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm so glad you're joining us for this one. Our mission today is to really break down the unprecedented cultural dominance, the incredibly complex life, and the deeply tragic, honestly horrifying medical death of Michael Jackson.
Yes. And to understand how the greatest pop star in history ended up setting some of the most shocking legal and medical precedents of the modern era, we are synthesizing a massive stack of material for you today.
A huge stack. We're looking at comprehensive biographical data, historical analyses of the Thriller era from the Library of Congress.
Which is fascinating, by the way.
Oh, totally. And we're also digging into a highly clinical forensic breakdown of Dr. Conrad Murray's trial. That one comes from the Florida Atlantic University Undergraduate Law Journal.
Right. We really want to trace that direct line from the absolute peak of pop culture to a fatal breakdown in basic medical ethics.
Exactly. But you can't really start at the end of this story, right?
No, definitely not. To comprehend the sheer gravity of his death, you really have to understand the magnitude of the cultural wasteland he disrupted to, claim the throne in the first place.
The early 1980s.
Yeah, the 1980s. And they were not this neon-soaked, vibrant nostalgia trip that we always picture today.
No, the economic reality of 1982 is incredibly grim. The United States was drowning in a profound recession.
Right.
I mean, the unemployment rate hit 10.8%. That was a 4-decade high. Entire manufacturing sectors were just shutting down entirely.
And when 1 in 10 Americans cannot find work, disposable income just vanishes. It's gone.
Exactly. And the music industry relies entirely on people having extra cash to spend on entertainment. So they were experiencing a complete panic. Record companies were laying off staff in droves.
And the avenues for music discovery, completely stagnant. Top 40 radio had really fractured.
What was dominating instead?
Well, the airwaves were utterly dominated by what the industry calls AOR, which is album-oriented rock.
I remember reading about that in the Library of Congress essay.
Yeah, and this format was highly repetitive, overwhelmingly white, and structurally designed to exclude R&B and dance music.
Because disco had just suffered that massive backlash, right?
Exactly. A hugely racially and culturally motivated backlash. It just faded out and left this massive cultural void.
Okay, let's unpack this really quick. Imagine you're releasing a record today, but no one has disposable income. The platforms for discovering music are stuck in the past, and the industry is firing everyone.
It's a nightmare scenario.
It really is. And MTV, which we now think of as the ultimate hitmaker of that era, was in its absolute infancy. It only launched in 1981.
And it was really struggling to figure out its own identity. It was largely just mirroring that AOR radio format to appease suburban cable subscribers.
Right. So releasing a high-concept, expensive pop album into that environment, it's like launching a luxury sports car in the middle of a global gas shortage. Just shouldn't have worked.
Right.
Market conditions were entirely hostile.
But into that exact hostility drops Thriller in the fall of 1982. And we really have to consider how people actually consumed this music back then.
Because it wasn't just YouTube and Spotify.
No, this was way before the accompanying short films became like hardwired into our cultural DNA. Listeners were buying LPs, sure, but they were also buying the compact disc.
Which is brand new.
Brand new. It was just made commercially available that very year. But more importantly, they were buying cassette tapes to play on the Sony Walkman.
Oh, wow, the Walkman. The psychological shift caused by the Walkman. You really cannot overstate it.
No, you can't.
Before this, music was largely a communal thing, or at least stationary. You listened in your living room, or in a car, or at a club.
Right. It wasn't deeply personal in the same way.
Exactly. The Walkman allowed people to experience this explosive, highly produced music privately, intimately, right in their ears as they walked down a gray recession-era street. It literally soundtracked their actual lives.
And the sound itself was completely alien to the prevailing trends of the time. Just look at the opening track, Wanna Be Startin' Something.
Oh, wait, yeah.
There was simply no existing genre category for this song in 1982. It wasn't disco, it wasn't straight funk, and it certainly wasn't new wave.
It was everything all at once.
Exactly. It was this unpredictable, aggressive fusion of all of them, driven by a relentless drum machine. And it culminates in that triumphant Swahili chant borrowed from the Cameroonian saxophonist Manu Dibango.
It was a sonic carnival. It
Oh.
totally defied categorization.
And that defiance translated into unprecedented saturation. I mean, we are talking about an estimated 35 million sales in the United States alone.
That's absurd.
And over 110 million globally. But beyond just the sheer volume of sales, Jackson forced a structural restructuring of industry compensation.
Right. The royalties. Let's talk about the royalties.
He demanded and he secured the highest royalty rate in the entire music industry at that point. He earned an estimated $2 for every album sold.
And if you adjust that for inflation, that is roughly $6 an album today. The capital he generated was astronomical.
It was immense. But, you know, the cultural restructuring was even more profound than the financial one. This music literally forced racial integration on MTV.
Because they had categorized themselves as a rock station.
Right. Exactly. They created this structural loophole to basically exclude Black artists. But Jackson's music, particularly the videos for Billie Jean and Beat It, were so undeniably masked
It was culturally unavoidable.
that MTV faced existential pressure to play them. And once they did, it completely dismantled their AOR format. It shifted the network's entire focus to pop and R&B.
He literally broke the color barrier on a brand new culture-defining television network just by sheer force of popularity.
He did.
And that structural shift paved the way for every single artist who followed. And then, you know, that integration moved from cable television to broadcast television.
Oh, yes. The Motown 25 special.
May 16th, 1983.
Right. So Jackson agreed to reunite with his brothers for this NBC special, but he had one major condition. He demanded a solo spot.
And when he stepped onto that stage to perform Billie Jean, wearing that rhinestone studded glove.
He debuted a move he called the moonwalk. Now, he had actually been taught the mechanics of the backslide 3 years earlier by a dancer named Jeffrey Daniel.
Really? I didn't know that detail until reading the sources.
Yeah, but Jackson took it, perfected it, and deployed it on the biggest stage possible.
47 million viewers tuned in. Just think about the gravity of that number for a second.
It's unfathomable today.
Outside of the Super Bowl, capturing 47 million people simultaneously today is basically impossible. There were no social media algorithms, no viral TikTok trends engineered to drive engagement, just pure, undeniable cultural gravity.
And the next morning, the entire country was talking about one single television moment.
Time magazine literally called him a one-man rescue team for the music business.
Yeah.
But, you know, when we look at a rescue team of that magnitude, we really have to examine the foundations. What kind of environment forged that kind of discipline and ambition?
To find out, we have to travel from the absolute peak of the music industry in the 1980s back to Gary, Indiana in the 1960s.
Right. Michael Joseph Jackson was born the 8th of 10 children.
10 children. And the environment they lived in was this tiny two-bedroom home on Jackson Street.
Putting 12 human beings in a two-bedroom house in a working-class Rust Belt city that just creates a pressure cooker of logistics and survival.
It does. His mother, Catherine, she was a devout Jehovah's Witness. She also played clarinet, cello, and piano, and she worked part-time at Sears.
As father, Joe Jackson.
Joe was a crane operator at U.S. Steel, a former boxer, and he played guitar for a local rhythm and blues group. The household was completely defined by intense blue-collar discipline and using music as a means of escape.
But going back even further into his lineage reveals this incredible testament to survival and adaptation that I found just fascinating in the biography source.
The ancestry details are incredible.
Right. His great-grandfather, Israel Nero Jackson, was a traditional indigenous herbal medicine practitioner. This stems from Native American Choctaw ancestry on his father's side.
Yeah, and the historical reality of this lineage is amazing. Israel Nero Jackson learned this herbal medicine practice from his father, July Jack Gale, who had actually served as a U.S. Army scout.
And before the American Civil War, July Gale married a black slave named Gina.
Right, so you have a U.S. Army scout, an enslaved woman, and an herbal medicine practitioner passing down survival skills through the generations, ultimately leading to that two-bedroom house in Gary, Indiana.
That complex, painful, deeply intertwined American history produced the individual who'd eventually write the global language of pop music.
And that language completely bypassed typical Western pop borders. I mean, the logistical reality of his fame is staggering when you consider how difficult it was to export American culture to certain regions before the internet.
Oh, totally.
Yet, his music penetrated areas that were entirely closed off to standard cultural exports.
Here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. A perfect example is the Quincy Jones interview, where he talks about fans literally dancing to Thriller in prison yards in Thailand.
Wow.
Or consider his arrival in Prague in 1996, where he literally outdrew the Pope in attendance numbers.
He outdrew the Pope. It's wild. And the influence extended heavily into the Middle East and South Asia, too. He held profound cultural weight in India and in Pakistan, where the nation reportedly mourned his death on a massive scale.
And the stylistic and musical innovations he pioneered, they formed the direct structural foundations of modern K-pop.
Exactly. Jackson wasn't just exporting American music, he was basically acting as a one-man global ambassador.
It's as if his music was an entirely independent currency, you know? It held emotional and cultural value in every country on Earth, regardless of the local political regime or the economic climate.
Right, like if you couldn't speak English, you still completely understood the mechanical precision of the moonwalk, you still felt the bass line of Billie Jean.
Absolutely. But when a human being achieves that level of global penetration, they kind of stop being a person. They become an industry.
A national treasure, a massive corporate entity. And the pressures required to sustain a human corporation are just unimaginably immense.
Which transitions us into the severe personal and financial complications that slowly started to surround him. When your music becomes a global currency, you become an economy.
And economies require management.
Right. And more dangerously, they attract an ecosystem of endless liability. This is the structural reality that sets the stage for his fateful alliance with Dr. Conrad Murray.
Right, because to understand the financial vulnerability of the Jackson estate in the late 2000s, we really have to look at the legal battles that drained his resources and forced him into deep isolation.
Now, looking at the sources, in 1993, Jackson faced severe allegations of child sexual abuse. And to be clear, our role here isn't to judge the veracity of these highly debated historical events, but just to track how they impacted his trajectory and his finances, based strictly on the provided material.
Absolutely. Impartially speaking, the investigation in 1993 was highly publicized and expansive. It spanned multiple counties. The authorities interviewed 430 witnesses and pursued numerous leads that ultimately turned out to be false.
And the criminal investigation concluded without any indictments.
Yes. But the parallel civil case did not disappear. It ended in a historic financial settlement. Jackson agreed to a settlement that established a $15.3 million trust fund for the boy, along with $1.5 million paid to each of the parents.
Bringing the total to over $18.3 million.
Right. The financial drain was massive, but the damage to his public image and his personal psyche was even more severe, and the scrutiny just didn't end.
No, it didn't. Because in 2005, he faced a criminal trial based on new allegations.
And after a grueling legal process and just a relentless media spectacle, he was completely acquitted on all charges.
Completely acquitted. But, you know, an acquittal in a court of law does not repair a shattered financial empire.
It definitely doesn't.
The cumulative effect of those investigations, the massive legal fees, and the sheer media terror fundamentally altered his life. He abandoned his Neverland ranch. He was seeking isolation in places like Bahrain.
He became functionally transient, despite having immense catalog wealth.
Which brings us fast forward to 2009. The cultural landscape is entirely different now. But the legend of Michael Jackson remains highly monetizable.
Highly monetizable, but he is heavily in debt. He desperately needs an influx of capital.
And this leads to the announcement of what the Florida Atlantic University Law Journal describes as his final vindication tour, titled, "This Is It."
Right. Now, the initial plan was for a 10-show residency at the O2 Arena in London.
Just 10 shows.
Just 10. But the demand was so astronomically high that it expanded to an unprecedented 50 shows.
50 shows. The ticket sales data here is actually terrifying when you think about the pressure it represents.
360,000 tickets sold in the pre-sales alone.
Pre-sales alone.
And when general sales opened, tickets were being purchased at an average rate of 11 per second.
11 tickets per second.
The global appetite was just absolutely ravenous.
So what does this all mean? That is a tidal wave of capital flooding in, sure. But in the concert promotion business, an unperformed show is a tidal wave of liability.
Oh, massive liability.
The promotional company managing this residency, AEG Live, they were staring down a monumental financial windfall, but also a catastrophic risk.
The clinical phrasing in the Law Journal really hits the nail on the head here. They wrote, "From a business perspective, this led to the reality that Jackson's depleting health was a contingency that could not be neglected."
AEG Live isn't just managing a tour. They're essentially building a billion-dollar skyscraper on a foundation they know is fundamentally cracked.
Right. Because if Jackson's physical health fails and he cannot perform those 50 shows, AEG is legally obligated to refund all those tickets, pay out the stadium contracts, compensate the crew, the vendors.
It would be a financial apocalypse for the promoters.
A total apocalypse.
Yeah.
The liability of remuneration rested entirely on AEG's shoulders. So, to secure their massive investment, they needed a mechanism to ensure Jackson could physically endure a 50-show arena residency.
They needed the expertise and the authority of a physician to mitigate that risk.
Yes. They didn't just hire a doctor to check his blood pressure.
No, they hired an insurance policy in a white coat.
Exactly.
They brought in Dr. Conrad Murray. Now, he was a cardiologist who was already medically affiliated with the Jackson family. His mandate was to serve as the in-house concierge physician, advising and treating Jackson 6 nights a week at his rented Los Angeles mansion.
And for his absolute discretion and constant availability, Dr. Murray was compensated approximately $150,000 per month.
We have to stop and unpack that number. $150,000 a month. That is not a standard doctor-patient compensation model.
Not at all.
That is a doctor on a massive corporate payroll, specifically tasked with keeping a multi-million-dollar asset functional.
Right. And when the doctor's paycheck relies on the tour happening, his fiduciary duty is hopelessly compromised.
Totally compromised. He is no longer serving the biological health of the patient. He is serving the financial health of the contract.
And this financial incentive structure is the exact mechanism that caused the horrifying breakdown of medical ethics inside Jackson's bedroom on June 25, 2009.
To really understand this tragedy, we have to dive deep into the pharmacology and the strict protocols of the drug at the center of this disaster.
Propofol.
Right, propofol.
Most people have never heard of propofol outside of this specific news story. What exactly is this drug, and why is its presence in a residential bedroom so alarming?
Well, propofol is a highly potent intravenous anesthetic. It's used to induce and maintain general anesthesia during major surgery.
Major surgery.
Yes. It works by slowing the activity of your brain and your nervous system. Specifically, it enhances the activity of GABA, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter.
Okay, so what does that actually mean for the body?
It essentially tells your brain to stop sending the automatic signals that keep you conscious. And, more importantly, it stops the signals that keep your heart pumping and your lungs drawing air.
So you don't just gently drift off to sleep. Your autonomic nervous system is chemically forced offline. Precisely. Because it depresses the respiratory and cardiovascular systems so severely, its use is incredibly restricted. The FDA had actually recalled the drug previously due to safety concerns.
I read that. They only reapproved it for use a few months prior to Jackson's overdose.
Yes. And the legally compliant administration protocol for propofol requires immense oversight.
Because if the drug suppresses your drive to breathe, someone else literally has to breathe for you.
Exactly. To use propofol legally and safely, you must have 2 doctors present. And crucially, one of those doctors must be a dedicated anesthesiologist whose explicit and sole job is to monitor the patient's vital signs for the entire duration of the drug's administration.
They're not performing the surgery.
No, their only job is to watch the monitors and maintain the airway.
So when the coroner discovers propofol in Jackson's system after he dies in a residential bedroom, the medical community is just stunned.
Completely stunned.
The standard autopsy protocol triggers an immediate forensic review.
Right. And the authorities brought in Dr. Selma Calms, an expert anesthesiologist, to thoroughly review the drug interactions and Murray's actions. She produced a meticulous 51-page report,
51 pages.
and her findings were devastating. The toxicology levels of propofol in Jackson's system were, in her words, similar to those found during general anesthesia for major surgery.
A cardiologist administered surgical-level anesthesia to treat a pop star's insomnia. It's hard to wrap your head around. But the propofol alone doesn't paint the full picture of the chemical collapse in Jackson's body, does it?
No, it doesn't. Dr. Calms also highlighted the presence of other heavy sedatives in the toxicology screen, specifically lorazepam, widely known as Ativan.
Right, Ativan.
It's a long-acting benzodiazepine, and it was present at a pharmacologically significant level.
This is where the chemistry becomes lethal, right? Because when you mix a long-acting benzodiazepine with an intravenous anesthetic like propofol, they don't just add together, they multiply each other's effects.
Exactly. The synergistic interaction is deadly. The lorazepam profoundly accentuated the respiratory and cardiovascular depression caused by the propofol. It is a literal chemical recipe for suffocation.
And Dr. Conrad Murray, a licensed cardiologist who specializes in the heart and should intimately understand cardiovascular depression, administered both.
Yes, he did. Which brings us to the trial and the testimony of Stephen Schaefer.
Now, Schaefer is a heavy hitter. He's a 20-year employee of the FDA, a pharmacology academic, and an absolute expert in modeling complex drug interactions.
The Law Journal actually calls him a hero in the war on truth regarding medical publication. He systematically dismantled Dr. Murray's actions on the stand.
Yeah, Schaefer didn't just say Murray made a mistake. He testified that Murray committed 17 separate and distinct egregious violations of standard medical practice while treating Jackson that night.
17 violations.
We really need to unpack these violations because egregious violation kind of just sounds like administrative red tape,
Yeah.
What actually happened in that room?
Well, the clinical logs detail a scene of absolute chaos and negligence. For one, Murray was leaving empty propofol bottles out in the open, allowing them to collect bacteria.
Which, in an intravenous setting, can easily cause severe sepsis. He's running an IV line into a human being without basic sterile protocol.
Exactly. And worse, he completely failed to monitor the patient's breathing. When you administer propofol, you use a pulse oximeter and continuous EKG monitoring.
Because the margin between sleep and respiratory arrest is razor thin.
Right. But Murray did not have the medically appropriate tools on hand for resuscitation. There was no crash cart, no automated external defibrillator, no proper airway management equipment.
To put this in perspective for you, it's like a commercial airline pilot deciding to fly a 747 blindfolded without a co-pilot while ignoring 17 blaring alarm bells in the cockpit just because the VIP passenger asked him to get there faster.
That is a very accurate analogy. He essentially pulled the main breaker on Jackson's autonomic nervous system, but didn't bother to bring a backup generator in case the lights didn't come back on.
And perhaps the most damning violation for a cardiologist. He ignored competing side effects.
Yes, the administration of these drugs caused wild fluctuations, increase and decreased heart rates, which ordinarily would have stopped any competent medical practitioner instantly.
Murray ignored the physiological alarm bell.
Completely ignored them. And when Schaefer was asked on the stand if each one of these 17 egregious violations was individually likely or expected to result in injury or death, his answer was a definitive yes.
Wow. Every single one of those 17 errors was lethal on its own.
Yes. Murray's actions, according to the journal, perforated the veil between negligence and malpractice. He administered drugs considered risky, experimental, or habit-forming without the necessary supervision. He acted with malignant disregard for human life.
This introduces an incredibly uncomfortable philosophical and legal debate. We have a dead body, we have a clear physiological cause of death, and we have a perpetrator who actively administered the lethal combination of chemicals while ignoring 17 critical safety protocols.
Right.
But because the perpetrator is wearing a stethoscope, the justice system processes the death through a completely different lens.
We really have to look at how the law defines the actions of a doctor versus the actions of a civilian here. This requires diving into California Code of Civil Procedure Section 340.5, which defines professional negligence for a healthcare provider.
Okay, so how does the state define professional negligence?
It defines it as a negligent act or omission by a healthcare provider in the rendering of professional services, which is the proximate cause of a personal injury or wrongful death, provided that such services are within the scope of services for which the provider is licensed.
So, wait, the law inherently assumes that because you hold a medical license, your lethal errors are just a failure of care, not an act of violence. It builds a protective shield around the profession.
It does. Now, Murray's actions were so egregious they crossed from civil negligence into criminal territory, but the classification remains critical. Murray was charged with violating California Penal Code Section 192B, involuntary manslaughter.
Involuntary manslaughter, which is founded upon lawful acts which might produce death if performed in an unlawful manner, without due caution or circumspection.
Right.
It implies that Murray was fundamentally allowed to treat Jackson. He just did it incredibly recklessly.
And the jury agreed. They convicted Murray of criminal negligence resulting in Jackson's death.
What was the punishment?
The punishment for involuntary manslaughter in California is 2, 3, or 4 years in state prison. Murray received the maximum sentence of 4 years in county jail.
But he didn't even serve all of that, did he?
No. Due to severe prison overcrowding in California at the time, he was only expected to serve a fraction of that time, although his medical license was revoked forever in the state.
So, administering surgical anesthesia in a residential bedroom, committing 17 distinct lethal violations, ignoring heart rate fluctuations, and lacking basic resuscitation equipment results in a fraction of a 4-year county jail sentence.
It's hard to reconcile.
The FAU Law Journal makes a brilliant, chilling comparison here to expose the inherent contradiction in how the American justice system applies the law based on professional status.
They contrast the trial of Dr. Conrad Murray with the legal precedent set by a case called People v. Dennis William Edwards.
The facts of the Edwards case are striking. Dennis William Edwards was a civilian, specifically a heroin addict. He was convicted by a jury for administering a lethal dose of heroin to his girlfriend.
Let's compare the mechanics of the two cases. Like Dr. Murray, Edwards was committing an unlawful act.
Right.
Like Dr. Murray, he was illegally administering an intravenous drug that suppressed the respiratory system.
Yes.
And crucially, like Dr. Murray, he accidentally killed the recipient without malice aforethought.
Hey.
He did not possess the specific intent to murder his girlfriend.
So the physical actions, the mechanism of death, and the absolute lack of intent to kill are functionally identical in both scenarios.
Identical, yet the judicial outcomes are light years apart. Dennis William Edwards was convicted of murder, an offense which, in the state of California, carries a potential penalty of death.
We really have to pause and interrogate this disparity. How does the exact same mechanical act accidentally killing someone with an intravenous depressant result in a county jail sentence for one man and a capital murder charge for another?
The distinction relies entirely on social and professional status. The Law Journal points out that Edwards was not professionally licensed.
Right.
He was not earning $150,000 a month to be mindful, knowledgeable, and professional. He had no legal or ethical obligation to uphold a societal oath to do no harm.
We like to think a medical license guarantees a standard of care. But the law looks at a civilian struggling with addiction and says, your reckless act is murder. Then it looks at a highly educated doctor who absolutely understands the lethal pharmacology of propofol, who knows exactly what a plummeting oxygen saturation level means, and who ignores 17 blaring medical alarms for a corporate paycheck and says, well, you're a professional, so this is just a terrible oversight, manslaughter.
The journal leaves us with a stark, binary conclusion regarding this legal precedent, they say. Either Edwards did not commit murder or Conrad Murray did.
Wow.
Because the lethality of the act was exactly the same. The justice system simply insulated the white-collar professional from the ultimate consequences as recklessness.
Does a medical license make a lethal act less criminal? Or should it make the practitioner even more culpable? Because unlike a civilian on the street, the doctor possessed the explicit education to understand the exact physiological mechanism of death he was causing, and he chose to proceed anyway.
It is a profound failure of equity in the justice system. But, the machinery of Michael Jackson's fame, the very machinery that necessitated the hiring of Dr. Murray in the first place, it did not stop functioning when Jackson's heart stopped beating.
No, it didn't. Despite the grim, infuriating reality of his passing and the legal paradox of the aftermath, the story pivots to the astonishing afterlife of his art. Because the corporate entity that built him and the financial pressure cooker that pushed him to the absolute brink, they immediately found a way to monetize him long after the human being was gone.
The posthumous empire is historically unprecedented. The biographical sources detail the seismic global reaction immediately following his death. In a testament to that enduring global currency we discussed earlier, Jackson became the first artist in history to sell over 1 million track downloads in a single week.
1 million track downloads in 7 days. The cultural void created by his death sparked a desperate consumer rush to reconnect with the art.
And in the years following his death, he sold 35 million albums posthumously. The estate generated over $1 billion in a relatively short amount of time, completely wiping out the massive debts that had forced the This Is It tour into existence in the first place.
Right. This windfall included a staggering $200 million deal with Sony Music to distribute his back catalog and unreleased material.
The demand never truly faded, it just evolved into new formats. The Thriller legacy continued with immersive 40th anniversary releases, bringing the original master recordings into spatial audio formats.
And the estate expanded into massive Broadway successes, like MJ the Musical, which won multiple Tony Awards. There are biographical films, documentaries, massive Cirque du Soleil shows in Las Vegas.
The cultural footprint continues to expand, totally detached from the vulnerability of the man who actually created it.
Which brings the paradox full circle. The art achieved the ultimate immortality, while the artist was crushed by the logistical requirements of sustaining it.
It's tragic.
When you pull all these threads together, Michael Jackson's life is a story of absolute, unbelievable extremes. We trace a working-class kid from a tiny two-bedroom house in Gary, Indiana. He rises up, breaks structural racial barriers on MTV, and creates a global language of pop music that unifies people from prison yards in Thailand to stadiums in Prague.
He achieves a level of fame that transcends humanity and borders on the mythological.
Yet the sheer weight of that mythology left him incredibly isolated. He became trapped by the massive financial pressures of maintaining a corporate empire, to the point where he became the victim of unprecedented, lethal medical negligence.
He died because a highly educated doctor, incentivized by a massive corporate tour contract, willfully ignored the fundamental rules of pharmacology and patient safety.
It is a uniquely American tragedy. A man who generated billions of dollars, who could command the attention of 47 million people with a single dance move, ultimately couldn't buy a safe night's sleep in his own home.
Before we conclude today, there is one final, deeply provocative detail regarding the drug that killed him. We discussed how propofol was heavily restricted and how the FDA had previously recalled it due to its inherent dangers.
Right.
Well, our sources in the FAU Law Journal noted a highly disturbing trend right before Jackson's death. Once propofol was back on the market, factions within the medical community actively petitioned the FDA.
Wait, they were lobbying the government regarding an anesthetic?
Yes, they actively insisted the FDA relax the mandatory, strict protocols to make the drug more accessible for broader uses. They even presented literature suggesting its potential use for off-label treatments, including severe insomnia.
Wait, really? The medical community itself was trying to loosen the safety regulations on a drug that shuts down the respiratory system.
Yes, which forces us to ask a deeply unsettling question. If the broader medical culture hadn't been fighting to loosen those exact safety regulations and normalize the drug's use just months prior, would a concierge doctor like Conrad Murray have felt emboldened enough to hook up an IV of surgical anesthetic in a residential bedroom?
That is, wow. We tend to look at Dr. Murray as an isolated, corrupt anomaly. But was he actually just the extreme symptom of a broader medical culture that increasingly bends the rigid rules of safety to meet the convenience and demands of extreme wealth?
Exactly. When medicine becomes a luxury service, does the Hippocratic Oath become negotiable?
It is a question that extends far beyond Michael Jackson's bedroom, touching the very core of how health, wealth, and legal accountability intersect in our society.
It's definitely something to think about.
That is a staggering thought to leave on. We invite you to deeply consider how status and wealth alter the application of justice, and how the massive machinery of global success can ultimately isolate and endanger the human being at its center. Keep asking those hard questions about the systems operating around us. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
And that brings another quiet episode of Sleepcast to an end. Thank you for spending this time with us. We hope our two hosts helped you relax, slow your thoughts, and perhaps drift gently off to sleep. New episodes of Sleepcast are released every day, 7 days a week, all year round. Follow Sleepcast on the podcast app you are using now, so new episodes are added automatically, and you can be notified whenever another wonderfully boring story is released. Until next time, sleep peacefully and good night. Sleepcast, probably the most boring podcast in the world.